Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a warm afternoon at the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Dan Moulthrop, Chief Executive here at the City Club and a proud member. So, as it turns out, cybersecurity has turned out to be a pretty big issue this past week. Just 1 week ago, we saw the first White House Summit on Cybersecurity and Consumer Protection held at Stanford University. The goal of that seems to have been to build alliances on cybersecurity between the government and the private sector, and it's not hard to see why. Target, Home Depot, Anthem, Sony, all victims of hacking, all incidents in which personal information of Americans got into the hands of criminals. At that event, President Barack Obama said, quoting here, "It's one of the great paradoxes of our time that the very technologies that empower us to do great good can also be used to undermine us and inflict great harm." After that summit, President Obama signed an executive order that urges companies to share cybersecurity threat information with one another and the federal government. Still, questions remain. And the question isn't, is our personal information safe? We kind of know that it's not. The big question is how to make it safe, or at least more secure than it is. Our program today is a little different than our standard forum. First, we're delighted that we're going to be hearing from Joseph M. Demarest, Jr., Assistant Director of the Cyber Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, on emerging cybersecurity threats. After that, Rick Jackson of IdeaStream will moderate a panel conversation with Mr. Demarest and leading information experts in the fields of healthcare and banking. He will introduce them. And finally, we'll have our traditional City Club Q&A, all in less than an hour. Amazing. A veteran of the FBI and a law enforcement officer from his days in the Sheriff's Department in Florida's Hillsborough County, Mr. Demarest has worked a variety of investigative matters, including counterterrorism, white-collar crime, organized crime and drugs, violent crime, and foreign counterintelligence. He was appointed Assistant Director of the Cyber Division in June of 2012. I present, on behalf of the City Club of Cleveland, Joseph M. Demarest, Jr., Assistant Director of the FBI Cyber Division.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Dan, and it's a pleasure and actually an honor to be here at the City Club and the invitation to come and speak at lunch with you. In coming to Cleveland from D.C., I was enticed to come this way because they told me it would actually be warmer here in Cleveland than it would be in D.C. No one told me to bring a hat either, and when you're follically challenged, it might have been a good move. And Dan, just going and look at the mural there, you know, I instantly when I looked up, it in white dudes aside, but it looked like FBI headquarters. We're all pretty much shaped like that, robes, fireballs, Lady Liberty. Anyway, so I thought I'd take the time. We'll talk about the major cyber threats facing the country today, all of us, I'll say. We'll talk about what the FBI in particular is doing about that. When I say the FBI, and I should say at the start, this big one team, and Dan referred to it, in talking about how industry plays a key role. It's not only government, U.S. government, it's foreign partners, industry, academia. You can imagine all the pieces that have to come together in this space. And as we talk, we're really at the beginning stages of how the country is going to respond to this. Some refer to we're in the basement as we build out, right, and working to the second floor. How are we as a country with industry going to react? Because they're attacking you, right, primarily. They look at government too, don't get me wrong. But you are the main target, and depending on what actor set we refer to, clearly, and for different reasons, right? For intelligence purposes, this is espionage, this is for some competitive advantage. And the main actor sets primarily 5, the way we break them down. Cyber terrorists, number 1. And we track them very closely, interagency working groups or groups, action groups. I hate to refer to anything as a working group, just connotes something that we don't ever come to results. It's action group, exclamation point. We want to make sure that we're always moving and accomplishing something against, as we call them, the adversary. Hezbollah being probably chief among them in skill and tenacity and size. Hamas, another major group. Then you see a lot of these other actors, Cyber Caliphate recently, right? Team System DZ that hacked into U.S. Cyber Command's Twitter and YouTube account. So they're doing, and it's low level, right? It tends to be website defacement, it's hacking into Twitter and whatever, but they're looking for, right, the skill, the tools to do more. They see the advantage of actually doing attacks in this space and what it causes, right? Threats via Twitter about, airliners and potentially bombing them and the like, and what that causes us as a government to respond to, and airline industry in particular, what do they do? And they see so great advantage. But internally, the FBI, working with colleagues in the intelligence community here within government, within the U.S., and certainly abroad, how we as a broader group actually track many of them around the world and watch to see them looking for additional skilled personnel, right, or people to actually do things on their behalf, and the tools. Obviously, they need to do that. We can teach probably anyone in this room, any layperson in this room, within 30 minutes, and with tools that are readily available on the internet today, to become a hacker. Maybe not a proficient hacker, maybe somebody we could easily catch, and we claim you as a stat. But anyway, with that being said, I have fuzzy handcuffs for you. Next, nation-state actors, right? And there were many, and you're very familiar with those out of Asia that we've worked recently. Sony, North Korea was a major attack on a commercial entity. And they're in it for different purposes that we've seen. Actors out of Asia, as you've seen, a lot of attacks in the healthcare industry recently, through the spectrum. Clear defense contractors, right, government and the like. A lot of information being, exfiltrated and processed and then potentially used against us. In the form of recruitment operations, human operations. They may steal information about you, your family members, and then develop campaigns around that to actually co-opt you as an individual who may have high clearance or otherwise with the government. You may be working with an institution or a contractor that's doing work on behalf of the government to get to you, to get to the, the ultimate goal of getting to that particular piece of technology they're interested in. I'll say some of the actors out of the Middle East, different reasons. It's about CNA, attack. It's about understanding what we and how we defend ourselves. We saw the attacks against the financial sector, right? Many of the major banks, 2012, 2013, DDoS, distributed denial of service attacks, overwhelming their publicly facing websites. So they learned a lot from that. And we have seen each actor set, Middle East, those emanating out of Eurasia, and Asia evolve, right, their tradecraft. Evolve their skill, getting better at what you do. Every time we take a step to counter, right, they counter. And I've said this in different settings, and last night was a great dinner conversation with the Citizens Academy Foundation and InfraGard here, sponsored through the office and our Citizens Academy team. As they do that, I had a senior moment there for a moment, so I forgot what I was going to say. See, everyone who's over 50, right, you looked at me and said, okay, I've been there, just move on. All right, next major set, so the next major group, so I'll act like it never happened. That's what we do when you get older. And it'll come back to me, and I'll flash back to it, and I'll cover it, certainly. But so a next major group, major cyber criminals that are out there, doing it for gain. And we've seen many, and obviously working against us, against a lot of different commercial victims, to steal your PII or personally identifiable information, credit card information and the like. And let me just say, everything they steal is sold in the data market, right, online, dark web. Everything is sold. So even the pre-attack things that they do to map your network, they'll take that and sell it to the highest bidder. So it's just, again, it's a market, a vast market, right? And anyone's willing to pay for, different things. There's prices offered for credit card, new whatever. I'll say health records too. That's that's actually fetching a significant price for a full file on you, your family members, and the like. So we have in our response, I'll talk about it more fully, but we have a group that's all they do is focus on the major cyber criminals around the world that we know of today. And they rely on shared services, so bulletproof hosters, AV checkers, so they check their malware with people who understand that they're checking their malware to see if it's caught by Symantec and McAfee and some of the other major AV companies, right? It's just natural. Money launderers, right? We see this virtual currency and how they actually help and assist some of these organizations. Hacktivist community, another fourth, right, major group that we track today. Anonymous, we're all very familiar with, right? Any major activity that happens, throughout, I'll say the U.S. here and abroad, obviously. They pick an issue, and then Ferguson PD, and I use that as an example. The shooting of Michael Brown there was an operation that was actually suggested by anonymous-related groups, Op Ferguson, and then they targeted Ferguson PD with distributed denial of service attacks. They doxed or collected all the information about senior police executives, posted all of that online. So you can see some of the officer risk, the challenges to not only the executive but the department itself, because they're posting the officers' information along with families' information as well. So you can imagine what that may feel like as you're in a position of a public trust and you're trying to do things that are right and good and just for the community, and then others are looking at you. And remember, when you're online, everyone can see you from around the world. It's not just here in the U.S. And there's advantage to be taken. They see your social security number, your date of birth, or whatever it may be, your home address. That opens us all up to risk in the sense that you could have someone who maybe not necessarily on balance take that information and individually take actions against. And lastly, for industry is the insider. Certainly for government, right? We have robust programs in place today to identify the Snowdens, if you will, in government. And certainly in industry, you'll have, it could be the accidental insider, someone who just opens up on a suspicious link or email, or it could be the more malicious, right? Someone looking to do your company harm. Take whatever, product or source code that you're working on for a new piece of technology, or do something a little bit more malicious and delete or damage, internal systems or data so you can't reclaim that. So, and many of you, I think, have programs in place today, and the FBI has a robust program and offer it too. So there are suggestions that we can make to companies in that space. So what is the FBI doing about it? So 2, 3, 4 years ago, 3 years ago now, Director Mueller kicked off Next Gen Cyber. That was for the FBI to really get focused on those most significant threats facing the country. And to get this division, Cyber Division, which I'm responsible for, focused on intrusion work, nation state, and criminal. And that's what we do today. We have today 56 offices across the FBI. Each office has its own cyber task force. All the information that's garnered or developed there is fed back, or at least shared with FBI headquarters, the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force, where it's assimilated. You can imagine you have several teams working on different cases or projects, but it's got to be coalesced and then in working with the community, I'll say, with NSA and others, and how we correspond, and certainly at the ground level, and this is what is definitely needed as you work in this space. You have to have the interaction with industry. The victim company wants to see somebody there when they want to see us. And again, I was reminded when I was out in San Jose last week for the President's Summit that when it's an emergency for them, that's when government needs to be there. When it's 2 o'clock on a Saturday morning, it's not that government waits until Monday to shows up or Tuesday when it's convenient. We have to be there when partners need us. Now, partners. There's a lot that goes in behind it, and I think we're starting, right? I think there's some good relationships we've created with industry on the whole. It comes back to trust. It's all human nature. These big, broad groups and how we share, I think, quite frankly, is going to be smaller groups of trust at first. And I described it last night. It's almost as if a chain link fence, and how then you chain or link all these separate groups together. And government's role is to provide the intelligence, the information, to help you better defend your company. The FBI has been described as a law enforcement organization, proudly so, but we are also, right, we have dual authorities, national security and criminal. We have discretion when it comes to actually working something or a case. You in private industry may be faced with something, you're afraid to come to government, or the FBI in particular, because, they'll come in, it's collecting evidence, we'll be on the stand someplace, somewhere, swearing out, a process or a complaint against a certain nation state or otherwise. That is not true. We work with several companies today, have no interest in prosecuting anything. However, they provide the information to the FBI, right, for the reason for us taking that information, sharing it with others in your sector or more broadly, to better defend the nation. Because what's happening to you could surely happen to partners left and right, or someone in your sector, and let me say more broadly, outside of your sector. There's been great cooperation you've read about with Sony in particular, a model, a lot of learning that's gone on over the past 3 years. Sony within hours notified the FBI. We were on ground, LA, we have experts out there for forensics and also from an operational standpoint, or operators out there that were able to engage with Sony's team along with FireEye, who was brought in as a managed cybersecurity provider. On ground, can you imagine what that team looks like? You have government sitting there, the victim, the managed cybersecurity provider, what they're learning from the forensics, right, as they go through. Remember, Sony went down. Their network was completely taken down, some of it voluntary, and then it was a step-by-step. They had to go through each box or machine when they were there. But as they learned things, they were able to provide it to the FBI agent who was on ground, run it through. We actually forward deploy. We have classified networks that we use, but we have developed a system that we can actually forward deploy and have it out there with the victim company. And what that means, it cuts down on time, right? We would iterate in the past. We would get the information, it'd take us time to process, then come back out. Everyone's familiar with government. We're trying to turn that where it's more high speed. So as they gave us information, we're able to check it very quickly, provide information back, because it's about that. You give us information. It's not going to some big black hole someplace, thank you very much, and never talking to you again. It should be where, thank you for the information, we've taken that, and now we come back to you. Here's what it meant. This is what your information led to. JP Morgan Chase, there was different articles about JP, another phenomenal relationship. They provided information early on in the investigation and allowed us to work with the other, I'll say, major banks in the financial sector to see if they were seeing the same problems, right? The same attackers, either in their networks or trying to get into their networks. But it comes down to that, right? We've got to stop for a moment, right? Understand this is not some competitive advantage to have these indicators and not share it with anybody else. And that's what we need to do, I think, wholly, with government, private industry, come together, understand each other, right? And again, visit out in San Jose last week, again, was very telling, where, at times we talk past each other, not fully understanding from each side's perspectives in what we're facing as a government, right? And what they're facing as a major global, corporation, and working that out. But there's got to be ways that we can actually work with each other, and understanding what those lanes are and what the information needs are by government and what needs are by industry. Private industry. Number of efforts by the Bureau today through the InfraGuard program is very vital. DSAC, Domestic Security Alliance Council, also very vital. But it comes down to this daily interaction. You could be sitting there as a firm, you're not really sure, or I have no contacts in government today. I don't know who to reach out for. And if you look at me and you don't know me, you're probably the last person you'd approach, right? Because I have this look. It's dark. I say it's chiseled good looks, but people say, you look scary. I don't know. Crunchy on the outside, soft nugget inside is what I say. Anyway, but you've got to, so no matter how scary we look, right, because we do come buttoned up, shirt and tie, there's got to be a way that you can actually come to us and we start having a discussion. And it should be over coffee, blue skies, puffy white clouds, when things are okay. Not on a Saturday when you're trying to find somebody, right, to respond to you and we don't know you quite yet and we're trying to understand what's happening. We are often, in working with the community, told about certain attacks against some of you and some of your organizations. It's our job and duties to make sure you're notified promptly with information you can actually do something with. And not coming to you and telling you, you've got a problem, everything else is classified, can't talk to you, bye. Right? Because we just leave you in a state of, okay, that was completely unhelpful. And you've got your whole organization now spun up, right? That there's a lot of concern. The Bureau, FBI, was on our doorstep. We've got a problem, but we don't know. So our commitment, we work very closely, and again, I harken back to the banks, but we've done it on numerous occasions. You as a company, if you're impacted, we know you are, we're coming out to you, and if you don't have clearances, we're going to read you on for the day. So what that means is you sign a form, right? You promise me your firstborn, your dog, goldfish, no cats, okay? No cats. I'm a cat lover, but from afar. But with that being said, but we read you on, so we not only give you the indicators, right, often classified, potentially, but the background. Who's attacking you, why we think they're coming after you, right? And then this way it will help you because it gives you context and you know why and potentially what you need to protect. We have found some companies out there, great patriots who've worked with us in the sense that they allow us to work with them and establish environments within your network so we can understand, watch the actors do what they do. It's great risk. There's a lot of discussion that happens internally with us, but see that it gives us the ability to study the actor and then take that information, the indicators and things that we see, and share it with others. Last thing is the plan. If you don't have contact with us, I suggest you establish, but internally have a plan. And that plan should include all the incident response pieces within your organization, your general counsel's office, definitely lawyers. How many lawyers in the room? I love all of you. I'm just going to hug from afar. You need to be involved because a lot of things we'll decide as operators are all good, hunky-dory, but the attorneys, and looking out for the firm or for government concerns, will bar certain things. And we have found, in sheer brilliance again, with some of these major hacks we've seen, Sony, Anthem, and others, is a commo or public affairs team, communications team. We've learned a lot and seen a lot, the things that have worked for companies and things that have not worked. And I'll end on this. If you think that you're going to, well, number one, we're all going to be hacked. And just, we're actually talked about creating a victim support group. Hi, my name is Joe Demarest. I've been hacked 4 times. This is my 5th. It's going to happen. But listen, for the CISOs in the room, it's going to happen. And really getting C-suite comfortable with that, it's going to happen to us. It's just what we do when it does happen to us. Communication's key internally, right? Internal comms, and externally. And working with us, I think we can kind of give you ideas, in that space that we've seen work. Because you will find somebody in your organization won't wait, right? They'll talk to a friend who talks to a friend who will talk to a reporter. And then before you know it, right, it's on the front page news and then you're fighting a fire. And there's no managing that message. The best you can do is start at the beginning. Try to manage as best you can. Take the appropriate steps. Take care of your customers, right, because they'll be most concerned. But have a relationship. That's the thing. We need to talk to each other. So Steve Anthony's a great leader out here who runs the program, or at least the office here. Steve has pulled my bacon out of the fire many times. I'm actually in this position because of Steve. Actually got me promoted at one point. And working with me 11:30 at night on my KSAs, I'm usually a man of few words and monosyllabic. But he says, I'm sorry, knowledge, skills, and abilities, it's a written thing that you have to do, a lot of prose, and Florida State, not University of Miami. But anyway, Steve helped me with that, and I'm actually breaking up your, I'm sorry, forgive me. But anyway, Steve, thank you again for I stand here before you because of you. Thank you. I'll stop there. I'll turn it over to Rick, sir. I think I went over my time, too. Forgive me.
That's quite all right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I think we've learned some things already. We're going to learn some more if Joe doesn't break up another piece of the podium. But thank you for that. We appreciate that. There are others on the panel here as well. But I wanted to start by talking about some of you because the FBI tells us that 100 million people in America have been hacked. So that means look around your table. 3 of the people you're eating with, if not you, have already been hacked if we use averages. That's a scary thought. That means probably one of us has been nailed. It just happens that way. One of you 4 has been nailed. So this is a problem that reaches into each and every home, each and every business, each and every law firm has a situation. So who else do I have up here with me? James Hogue is the Vice President and Chief Information Officer of Partners Healthcare. That means you're an expert in the medical identity theft area. And given what's happened with Anthem recently and what that means to people here in Ohio, we'll certainly be talking about that as well. And Amy Brady is the Chief Information Officer at Key Bank. So thank you both for being here. Thank you, Joseph, for being here. Let's get started. I'm going to give him a chance to breathe for a second, if that's okay. Start with you, James. The idea that health systems can be hacked, not new to you, but probably new to a lot of us. You and I were talking before. Tell me what you told me about the value of obtaining my health info. Why would anybody want to know my health situation?
Sure. So Joe mentioned that selling things in the dark web, and typically personally identifiable information, maybe $2. Medical record starts at $50, can go up to $500. Why is it valued so high? First is you can do the basic issuing new credit cards, so what you do with PII, but also insurance fraud. So in terms of medical identity theft, in 2010 they estimated 1.4 million instances, 2014 1.84 million instances to a cost of $12 billion. So there's the insurance fraud, false claims. There's writing prescriptions for OxyContin and other controlled drug substances that can be sold on the street. There is actually having treatment under another person's name. So there's instances where people have gone to the Red Cross to give blood and they find out they can't give blood because someone has stole their identity and reported a disease that doesn't allow them to donate blood. Yeah, so really the insurance card is very powerful. And then the most nefarious, and hopefully doesn't happen, is someone that would actually want to alter somebody's treatment and outcome. In the laboratory setting, people have actually hacked into infusion pumps and been able to adjust titration rates. So you already can see the thriller novel that's going to come out, or the movie, in terms of a nation state killing a head of a nation through hacking in biomedical equipment. So there's a lot of value.
That is frightening. The breach, I mean, it's, to say the least.
Feeling good now.
Yeah,
aren't you?
no, not at all. The breach in Anthem, they have 80 million customers. Was that a wake-up call to the industry? There but for the grace of God go we?
I'll answer quickly and then have Amy answer, because I don't think it's unique to healthcare. Yeah, the more they diagnosed that instance, it was really getting a hold of legitimate credentials to access the database, whether that's through social engineering, whether that's through malware. So you read in the paper they talked about, well, the data wasn't encrypted at rest. Really didn't make a difference because they went in with full credentials to pull that data down. So the wake-up call is how important credentials are, especially where we have people that I would call privileged access, and how you manage privileged access to your databases.
Yeah, you're one of the top 25 banks in America, a truly big bank. So you have probably more defense out there, but that makes you a bigger target. So you have to be, I guess, always on top of what's coming next toward Key.
So, I think Joe said it very well. It will happen. So what are you doing to be prepared? Now, by the way, Joe, that doesn't make it easier in our roles, and it doesn't make you sleep at night, because it is our job to protect our company's assets, which is the information that we hold really dear for our clients. So it is critical that we are staying as current as possible with all the multi-layers of defense that we can put into play, while learning from our partners, like our friends at the FBI, around what is changing in the world, so that as we get better, unfortunately, so do these actors, and they get more sophisticated, and it gets more challenging, and so it's a constant, very dynamic environment for all of us.
But you can't spend all of your time teaching your people defense. What do you do right now? What does any bank do to help your people know when something is coming in targeted toward the financial industry? Because you're one of the pillars of America.
So we talked about this a little bit, and this is cross-industry, right? So the phishing attempts that are hitting all of us, and whether they be hitting your personal devices or your devices in your corporations, are getting more and more sophisticated. And even the best of us that understand what's happening are clicking on things we shouldn't click on, right? So it's not, you're right, it's not just educating. However, there is a component that all of us do own around educating our employees and our clients, quite frankly. For financial institutions, we do a lot of work trying to educate our clients on, are they protected? Are they keeping current on malware and all of the things that they need at their endpoint, so that when we interact together, we are then a safe ecosystem. So it's education, it's constant communication, and it is awareness. The last piece I would say is it is something that is quite personal, and all of us need to own. No longer can you say it's just financial services, or it's just healthcare, or it's just the defense industry. It's every industry, it's every individual that has to be aware of what's kind of happening and take it seriously.
Yeah. Can I follow up?
Go right ahead.
Because I think Joe's comments are really important. I think all of us 5 years ago, if we had an incident, we didn't want to share that information. It was a black mark, and we held it close, and who's going to sue us if they find out that we've had a breach? Now it really is open sharing, and I know the FBI, I'm in the Boston area, very cooperative, using what are called the managed cybersecurity service providers. We have one that's constantly looking at our network, but more coalitions and collaboration of sharing information. So there's a group in Boston, and they call it Tuesday. Every Tuesday, everybody sends somebody to a center, and they talk about what advanced persistent threats in that they're seeing. So that sharing is really important, because no company can secure their assets alone. It's impossible. They need the help of government, of other companies, and of other service providers.
Good point. And Joe, are there companies that do want to stick their heads in the sand and pretend it's not going to happen to us, or companies where you go to through whatever purposes you have and you found out something happened, you knock on their door and they really don't want to hear it?
Well, I think less and less so today, because I think they're becoming more comfortable actually interacting with government. Great story, CDC Southeast, I mentioned this last evening. We're tipped out by, I'll say, someone in the intelligence community there's going to be a hack, or at least there was targeting of a certain facility, Clear Defense Contractor Southeast. Clear Defense Contractor, very good on cybersecurity, decided they didn't need assistance. Within 24 hours or so, they're actually calling, saying that those same actors are now in their network. So we actually work with a company for a period of about 10 days. They had taken that particular system off the internet, put it back on. The actors were back in within about 72 hours. Wow. Got a piece of what they were looking for. They form problem-solving teams too. So remember, there's sheer brilliance on the other side of the ocean or the globe, actually facing and looking at. They don't fully understand what happened, but there will be a problem-solving team. How do we actually go back after that and get what we want?
I would add, though, in our industry, in the financial services industry, there is a huge shift in collaboration. If one financial services company is seeing something, it's very quickly shared between the chief information security officers, whereas years ago that would not happen. So that's good. To me, that's a really good sign. A really good sign.
You and I talked about something earlier, the idea that there are brilliant people working for you as there are working for the other side, but there's not enough of them. So you'll have somebody at Key who will get snatched away by FedEx, and they'll have somebody get snatched away by PNC.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that all my teammates that are sitting here are not passing out cards.
Stay away from the government folks too, okay?
As our information security team is here. But it is, so I say this to high school age and college age students all the time. If you want to get a really hot career, go into cyber information security and all the related fields and get that technical expertise, because the number of industries looking for that in talent has exploded. And so it is a growing field, and we are competing for the same talent, which makes it a little bit harder for all of us. But the good news is there is great talent out there. It's just getting more competitive to find it.
James, you talked about the dangers of losing our identities or losing our health. Dollars and cents, what does the health industry, the health insurance industry, think you're losing in terms of people coming in, tampering, selling?
As I said, the estimate last year is the only information I have, that there was 12 billion was monetized through medical fraud throughout the country.
12 billion.
$12 billion, exactly. And this is a loss mostly to CMS and Medicare and Medicaid, where you see a good deal of fraud, but also in the commercial industry. I also want to comment on the talent is, we've started to aggressively go after the universities, because you're not going to find 15-year seasoned people in IS. Ends up, they're actually very smart people,
really good.
And they'll run through walls for you. So they're actually a good pool to tap in terms of some of the colleges and universities and their programs.
So that means you're both targeting younger people to bring into the industry, but at the same time, are there a lot of people who are entrenched in their ways, who don't get the new cyber life that we live in, who don't really measure up when it comes to defense?
I actually think it's the other way around. I think from a talent pool perspective, the younger talent is great. They come in and they'll look at things, they'll analyze things, they're eager to learn, and so that's great. I think the difference in the generational gap that we see is that for those of us who may be of a certain age and older, we take this seriously. We take protecting our identity seriously. If you look at the next generation, like my children, who are who are digital natives, their definition of privacy is very different than our definition, and so I worry about that. And when we see young employees, they get a little frustrated when their desktop doesn't fire up like this, and it has to go through all the protocols that we're putting it through for security. Like, well, why doesn't it just fire up like my iPhone? So I think that's the generational difference we're seeing, and we're gonna have to work on that both corporately and personally.
So I agree. I think all of you probably share pieces of information here and there. We had a company from the defense industry that'll remain unnamed, but we had them come in and they actually profiled our company, but they profiled some people too. They went to their Twitter accounts, they went to their Facebook, and they said, "Here, I have enough information to recreate your identity and steal your identity, because your birth date was here." In terms of what they call knowledge-based resources, where it might ask security questions. I found out that you bought this car in 1980, and that's one of the security questions. So they can build profiles by really doing what's called a big data scan across the internet. And Joe, I don't know what you see in that space.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more of that. In fact, when we talk about these human-driven intelligence operations against us, I'll say USG employees, or more broadly, some in the community. So it's your online profile they'll use, right? They use social engineering to understand more about you, right down to using people, right, who know about you, who may interact with you, to learn about, you as a person or people that you're close to.
Yeah, we all give away far more than we expected to give away. I think maybe 5, 10 years ago, we are not the private people we used to be. So the other side is smart enough to analyze that, to use it against us. How do we stop it? Not as companies, as individuals. What can we do learning from the FBI?
Yeah, so what I would first say is that, we talked about spears and opening email. They are so much better today than they were 2 years ago. Before, it would be Chinese characters potentially, or something written in broken English. Today, it looks like a legitimate spoofed email. Attending the City Club's event today, I'm meeting some of you. Hey, here's my business card, and I won't think anything of it because it'll be 9 o'clock tonight. Get back in D.C., where it's going to be 1 degree below zero, by the way, and I'll be wearing a hat.
Oh, warm.
Yeah. But anyway, so that's so they're brilliant. So they keep on moving. But the thing is, once you think you've been compromised because it doesn't make sense. You need to notify somebody. I think that is the thing too. We tend to, I may have made a mistake. We're gonna find out anyway. So you might as well just broadcast it, tell somebody, and then isolate the device and don't use the account further.
Specific to healthcare, there's something, and I know that, they're like Chinese characters. Your explanation of benefits is reviewing that. Who is hitting your insurance accounts? If you lose your insurance card, act like you lost your credit card and report it. Review your medical record. You own your medical record. You have a right to see it and review it on a consistent basis. There's other things, emails. I know I've taken to personally, I actually enter a URL, I won't click on a link, because often if you go behind that link, and the FBI folks know this and Amy knows this, if you really look, the URL that's put up isn't a legitimate URL, but people tend not to look at that and just keep going. So those are important things that you can do, and be suspicious. I grew up in Cleveland. I remember the people that were walking around pretending they were reading water meters and get into homes. Well, yeah, that people are suspect of, but for some reason they're not suspect of an email, and that's the keys to the kingdom.
So you're telling me the Nigerian prince didn't really leave me money?
No, that's right.
It'll take $5,000 first from you to actually get to that money, right?
Dan Moulthrop.
All right. And we'll send the FBI a invoice for this. I no idea what you did over here. It's remarkable. Chiseled, good looks. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we're very much enjoying a Friday Forum panel discussion titled "Hacked: The Threat of Cybersecurity," featuring Joe Demarest, Assistant Director, Cyber Division for the FBI, Amy Brady, CIO at KeyBank, Jim Noga, Vice President and Chief Information Officer at Partners Healthcare, and moderated by my friend and former colleague at IdeaStream, Rick Jackson, host and producer. We encourage you all to formulate your questions now for our panel, and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point so we can squeeze in as many as possible. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via our primary media partner, 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ PBS, 104.9 WCLV, that's all IdeaStream, or one of the many radio stations across the region and country that carry City Club programs. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. Please be sure to join us on Friday, March 6th at noon as we welcome Evan Wolfson, founder and president of Freedom to Marry, for a discussion on the historical, political, and social evolution of marriage equality in the United States. For more information about that program or any of our upcoming or past forums, please visit us online at cityclub.org. Today's program is the Myron N. Crotinger Endowed Forum, made possible by a generous gift from Mr. Crotinger. We thank him very much for his support. And we welcome guests at tables hosted today by Excelis Technology Group, FBI Citizens Academy Foundation, Eureka Software, KeyBank, Medical Mutual, and Thompson Hine. We thank you all very much for your support. Our community partner for today's program is the Excelis Technology Group. We would now like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club Q&A, our panels. Our speakers on the panel, for our traditional City Club Q&A. We welcome questions from all of you, including guests. Holding our microphones today, our content associate, Teddy Eisenberg, and our volunteer, Spencer Kiesel. Our first question, please.
We actually have a question from Twitter first. Mike is asking, is there a movement for a national organization to standardize security of information, similar to what the National Transportation Safety Board has done?
Joe, I'll throw that at you.
Well, I'll start with, so the President rolled out the Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center, which will be created next 3 months or so. Funding set aside, personnel staffing is being discussed today. That in itself is going to be more or less a clearinghouse for finished products across the interagency or the agencies that are working in this space. So we got a common picture on a given threat actor, and then indicators that are gleaned from that, shared with not only the FBI, but with DHS, U.S. Cyber Command, and then for us then to share further, right, with industry and partners in that space. So that's another broad step in coordination and trying to assimilate data from from a disparate field.
Are people who come to this country who have a limited knowledge of English, are they particularly vulnerable victims because they don't know where to go or what to do?
Well, I think we're all vulnerable. Limited, ability to speak the native language or otherwise. In Ohio, I speak New York, but I understand everybody here. No, I think there are different communities that are preyed upon. We see the elderly are preyed upon, those looking for housing are preyed upon. I was looking recently for a 2-bedroom apartment in Washington, D.C., and you go on different sites, and then I was targeted by a scammer. When we put up a certain amount of money for this apartment, I was actually tempted to write the check out. But you couldn't see the apartment in advance, and the apartment, was, as described, was a premium spot for a bottom, a dollar value. But even I was tempted, and we're all tempted, right? And that's the thing, is you might want to, as Jim mentioned, you might have to just stop, pause for a minute. Is this legit or not?
It sounds too good to be true.
It is.
Yeah, I think mostly they look for vulnerable populations, and that's I know a very general statement, but that's what they're looking for.
I've bumped into news stories about the desire of some of the technology companies to bake way down deep inside their products some pieces of code that really nobody knows about, and in particular that the national security agencies may not be able to penetrate unless the company allows them to do so. Do you have feelings, perhaps Mr. Demarest particularly, whether or not this is a good trend in the way of building intense defenses, or whether that compromises the ability of the nation to monitor what's happening?
Well, first off, I'd like a list of all those companies that are doing that, notifying government. No, I'm only kidding. So anything that makes us more secure, right, and maybe those companies in particular, they've all got to be thinking about this broadly, right? But there's got to be some balance to it as well, and understanding what we may need as a government or law enforcement entity versus what the company may need and trying to produce and do, to protect itself or a broader, maybe its clients. There's got to be discussion on something like that. But again, there is no requirement for industry to report anything to government, right? From an event to activities like that. I mean, it's being creative. It's creating something that better protects them as a company or their clients. So there's probably more to be had on that thought. I think the weeks, months, years to come. This is still developing. It'll be interesting.
Amy, I know that the banks have layers and layers of different kinds of defense. Many companies do the same thing for you, and you use them all. You're not endorsing any of them, of course, but at the same time, do you worry that they now know things about you? You've given them the keys.
No, no, we don't. I mean, we definitely use, so I want to comment a little bit. So one, it is important to have secure coding practices in your technology ecosystem, whatever that is for you and your company. So I think that's important. You have to be constantly looking whether you're buying things from other people or whether you're putting something into production. Is it secure? Does it have vulnerabilities? Is it ready to go into an environment that you can operate in the most secure fashion for whatever industry you're in? We do have partners that help us with monitoring, much like Jim said. And no, I don't. I mean, their job and part of the reason you choose them is they're experts in this field and they're able to see things that you may not see. And so there's very strong relationships there. So I don't worry about that. I worry about a lot of other things. I don't worry about that.
As we all should, apparently. James, any comment?
I only comment, and again, it's not specific to healthcare. I have talked to people in the defense industry that they're very concerned as to where you source your equipment. Not in terms of blocking the NSA's ability, but other nation states embedding things in chips and that give them visibility into what's happening in this country.
They look for the weakest link. So supply chain, you make a widget that's going to a broader component for the U.S. military. They may look to attack that company or that widget in particular, knowing full well that it's going to be installed at a later point.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to show you how hardy we Clevelanders are.
Oh, you are, Hardy.
Right. I work for the Anti-Defamation League. We do a lot of research of hate groups, all of which we share with the FBI, gladly. So I know how easy it is in some instances for our researchers to get into some of those groups. The question I have, because we're a 100-year-old civil rights organization, is what is the impact on an individual's civil rights vis-a-vis cybersecurity and all the great stuff you're doing?
Well, I think we take into account, right, the civil rights or, and privacy protections in everything we do. There's nothing we do. We have attorneys attached at each hip. Much of the authorizations that we need are provided by a court, whether on the national security side, through the FISA court, or I'll say through criminal courts throughout the states. But we're all at risk, I think, when it comes down to it. And the actors pay no mind to our civil rights protections, right, nor privacy protections. They'll exploit us to the extent they're satisfied. So, but from the government side, though, we take that, and I'm telling you, the regimes that are in place today to ensure we're not crossing that line, and the review that is done, there's no single entity within not only the FBI, but all the USG, that can do things unilaterally on their own without notification to partners or to a legal authority.
And the private sector takes that equally as deeply to heart as well, right, is protecting that privacy of the information. And so even when we share with the FBI, if there's an event happening, we're very, very cognizant of what are we sharing and how are we sharing it. I think Dan mentioned kicking off the work that the President has begun to kind of bring light to, and that's a lot of the discussion is kind of how do we protect the right to privacy, yet share the most important information to protect all of us and our country.
We take it very seriously. I don't think there's anything as personal as your medical information. And it's interesting. If you're breached, on a financial basis, it takes time, but you can fix it. It's really hard to fix when medical information has been altered just because of the connectivity and how quickly it propagates across different electronic health records.
And from the pursuers, from the FBI's perspective too, we're interested in the indicators of the attack, not the information, generally speaking, of what was stolen. Now, as we come across things that are placed on Payspin, or sometimes they're adding insult to injury. Not only stolen, now they're publicly posting it someplace. But when that is seen, is then providing that back to the company so they can cross-check, is it one of their records that are out there? But generally, the government and the FBI in particular are just interested in indicators of attack and not PII or otherwise.
Okay, let's go here.
You mentioned how you are working with smaller companies and clients to get them education on what they should be doing. How successful are you finding this education is in making them start to take the right precautions and to really seriously look at themselves as being at risk instead of just the targets of the world?
Yeah, I think it's very successful, but for us, it's one client at a time. So I can't measure that 100%, but we see the companies that do business with us appreciative when we sit down and talk to them about what we might be experiencing and helping them. I think the other piece we've all got to balance is the levels of investment required to protect your entity, and depending on what industry you are, depending on the size of your company, depending on the type of target you may or may not be, to the various types of threats that Joe laid out, you're going to have to vary that investment. So we also try to take that into consideration. But the fact of the matter is, I think it's one client interaction at a time. And unfortunately, I think the headlines have helped, as sad as that is, because people understand, hey, it is going to happen, and it may not just be the big guys that it happens to, right?
Comment on that. So that's one of my greatest concerns is really the smaller businesses, the smaller organizations that can't necessarily make the investments or aren't necessarily aware of the threats. And I think there's been several instances over the past several years of small physician practices in the 4 to 10 range where they've actually had their medical records locked with ransomware and said, you send us X dollars and we'll unencrypt your data and you get it back. They're just not prepared, and that's just not healthcare. It's also in retail, the smaller organizations in terms of credit card protection. And I'm not certain how we address that on a long-term basis without the help of government and setting some standards that can be easily adopted by smaller businesses.
And a hack is a gift that keeps on giving, right? So if you didn't invest appropriately or pay some attention to it, right, small, medium-sized business, PII is stolen, then you'd be facing lawsuits, right? Maybe from not only employees, but separately your clients and customers. You lose that base, there's a good potential these companies go under. So the things that really start having that discussion at the president, CEO level, C-suite level, do we have the right things in place? It may not even be with contact with government yet, but just understanding, are we doing the right things? Are we protecting the information that we think we have? Because if you don't, you'll pay for it later.
Somebody does have a ransom-like attack. If they come to the FBI and say, my information's been stolen, do you have technology that can help them recover? Can you tell them where to go?
Yeah, so recently, Game Over Zeus, and it connected was a crypto locker, and crypto wall was another big thing. So crypto wall is attacking major companies and locking up drives or servers, encrypting the information, right, and then threatening or ransoming the information of the keys to unlock it for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and some companies paying because they're not backed up appropriately, right? They don't have access to the information to restore it. We have done, there was a major operation, it was a Russian actor was responsible for the crypto locker, and we were able to garner or collect some of the keys that were used to lock up, right, or encrypt certain victims' computers and provide those keys back. But once it's encrypted, it's very difficult, right? And so I think bringing in the FBI in particular, we could pursue the actor and hopefully get to him or her, because there are some ladies out there that have taken to hacking for hobby or sport or a way of life. But there's a way to get to them, right? And then get to the keys that can potentially help you as a company. But we'll help you through that too. But again, it's all about backing up, and both Amy and Jim agree, but if you've got to have the information that's available and storage where you can bring it back up.
Okay. Let's squeeze in one more question.
Thank you again for your time. I had the opportunity last week to go to Pittsburgh and attend a cybersecurity session. And in Pittsburgh, they talked about the NCFTA. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how the private sector can work with the FBI as well as the NCFTA to help collaborate and keep information secure?
Yeah, so the NCFTA, what he's referring to as National Cyber Forensic and Training Alliance in Pittsburgh, it's the collision of government and private sector entities. They're a 5013C. They host the space. A number of different companies are part of that, share indicators and things they're learning. They have a way to anonymize that data, the indicators. Government, we have 2 units from Cyber Division actually embedded with the NCFTA today. Our SURFU is one, and then don't even ask me what the acronym means, okay? Cyber Initiative, some Resource Infusion Unit. We come up with cool names in government and acronyms. And then we have a targeting unit up there as well. But we work, and that's some of the greatest, I don't know if I mentioned, but Operation Clean Slate against the major botnets that are out there, web robots, prioritized by industry and government. And then we go after the botnet itself, the infrastructure, but also the actors behind it. So synchronizing enforcement operations with the operators. So you're not just knocking or taking down botnets, you're actually taking down subjects as well, because there's only a few of them out there with the skill and the level to actually pull these things off. We have found great value. Maria Vella, CEO there, has done some amazing work in expanding that, and some companies should consider. And that's a way that you can actually participate and actually work with government somewhat indirectly at times too. So you could be on site or you could, remote in.
Good quick answer. Let's do one more.
To the panel. I've been fortunate. I've worked in cybersecurity for the last 30 years. And the one thing I've noticed is banks, healthcare organizations, industries, we spend billions of dollars on hardware, billions of dollars on software, and training our people, yet we still seem to be lagging behind the actors. Are you seeing any indication that we're going to get ahead, or are we always going to be the tail wagging the dog? Thank you.
My view is there will always be new threats. Threats are being developed now that we are probably unaware of. And this is why it's so important to work with the FBI and other alliances at trying to find out what's going to happen next. Another company that I've had discussions with, I like their philosophy of they're going to get in. We need to figure out how to keep them from getting back out. And I know that's a very general statement. But the answer is our job's never done no matter what we invest. And so we have to adapt every day and look at new defensive or offensive postures.
Yeah, and, it's about building the fences, digging the moat, guard towers. But on the other side, and we pay less attention to it, but in the FBI we do, it's about imposing a cost, right, for doing the things they do, no matter where they sit in the world. So until we start bringing that to life, because you can't patch the world. You know, we see it over and over, same companies being hit again, same actors, different actors. But you have to go after them so they know if they do this, I potentially could suffer. We had some great success against some actors out of the Eurasia where arrests are happening. They see it and feel it, and it's communicated among this community. They're selling off their tools, right, or their botnets they control, and they want to get out because they've made a fortune. So it's about imposing cost.
Amy Brady, last word.
I'd say the answer to that question is we're always ahead and we're always behind. For all of the reasons we just talked about, it's an incredibly dynamic space. And if you want to give me your business card after this, we'll talk about other opportunities. I mean, just all kidding aside, because we need more people like you wanting to get into this part of the business.
Okay. Amy Brady of Key Bank, James Noga of Partners Healthcare, Joseph Demarest of the FBI. Thank you all so much.
Rick, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this forum is now adjourned.
Committee will come to order. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's hearing, Cybersecurity, Assessing the Immediate Threat to the United States. Appreciate your patience and understanding as we had votes earlier, and I know we're getting off to a delayed start, but I appreciate you all being here and participating. I'll also welcome Ranking Member Tierney, members of the subcommittee, and appreciate everybody being here today. Today's hearing is designed to act as a prelude to the full committee hearing, which will be conducted a week later on June 1st, later in just a short time from now. It's entitled Cybersecurity, Assessing the Nation's Ability to Address the Growing Cyber Threat. During today's hearing, the subcommittee is scheduled to receive testimony from the administration, industry, and civilian cyber threat experts, all of whom will likely state that the cyber-related intrusions pose one of the greatest threats to our national security. The intent is to obtain detailed information from various sources and from various perspectives as to what the current threat actually entails, so the committee can later delve more deeply into how effective the nation has been in confronting the immediate cyber threat, as well as building defenses which safeguard us from what appears to be a daunting future cybersecurity environment. Given the unusual nature of the cyber threat, it cannot be addressed solely by using the traditional national security apparatus. In short, the Federal Government is currently incapable of securing the nation against cyber threats on its own and must embrace a broad, transparent involvement of non-government entities. Like other countries, approximately 85% of the nation's critical infrastructure is owned by the private sector, many of which are small businesses. Because the nation relies so heavily on private industry to protect this infrastructure, trusted partnerships between the government and private sector must also be a priority. In words of the President, quote, "Cybersecurity is a challenge that we as a government or as a country are not adequately prepared to counter," end quote. In addition, in a recent interview, Howard Schmidt, the U.S. Cybersecurity Coordinator, emphasized the critical nature of public-private partnerships as it relates to cybersecurity. Unfortunately, Mr. Schmidt refused to testify today. I truly do find this unfortunate, as I believe he should be here in this important discussion. I am deeply concerned that Mr. Schmidt is the Executive Branch's Cybersecurity Coordinator, charged with the responsibility for, quote, "orchestrating the many important cybersecurity activities across the government," end quote, believes that his management of this critical issue is exempt from Congressional oversight. That is certainly inconsistent with what I have heard the Administration and this President say about the openness and transparency of the Administration. In his absence, the Administration has sent to us an expert from the Department of Homeland Security. There was quite a debate whether the Administration would allow him to sit on the same panel as the industry experts sitting in front of us today. I am glad that the issue was resolved in a matter of a few hours ago, and that we will now be able to receive testimony from both the public and private perspective together on one panel. In the future, I hope this is not so difficult. That said, I must stress my sincere disappointment in the number of days wasted debating the need to hear testimony from government and private witnesses alike at the same time on the same panel and in a manner that allows members to most effectively oversee this critical public-private partnership. I believe it is critical that while we focus on the cyber threat, we also keep in mind the need to develop well-coordinated strategic cybersecurity partnerships with the private sector in order to confront the threat. The Administration has made repeated public statements about the importance of this partnership. Even the White House directed cyberspace policy review conducted concluded that the United States cannot succeed in securing cyberspace if it works in isolation and should enhance its partnerships with the private sector. Cybersecurity experts agree that given the likely national security impact of cyber attacks on the economy, our critical infrastructure such as transportation, energy, and communications, both private and public sectors must work together closely and in a very transparent way. This would also appear to be in line with the President's stated commitment to, quote, to create an unprecedented level of openness in government, end quote, and, quote, to establish a system of transparency, public participation, and collaboration, end quote. The ever-changing face of the cyber threat means that the authorities and capabilities needed to confront the threat will likely need to be changed or updated on a regular basis. This is the reason why Congress must be as attentive to the threat as any other part of the government. I do not believe anybody knowledgeable of cybersecurity would deny that cyber threat is a major national security issue for the United States. The National Security Strategy, published in May of 2010, highlights that cybersecurity threats represent one of the most serious national security, public safety, and economic challenges we face as a nation. Therefore, a national dialogue on securing the nation's digital infrastructure must happen now and continue indefinitely. It is my sincere hope that this dialogue can include many segments of society and can be done in a nonpartisan way. It is my hope that we as a nation bring to bear against this threat all expertise that resides within the country. Strangely, we are faced with the critical national security threat to which the expertise needed to confront it does not necessarily reside solely in the Federal Government, but also in the private sector. A recent research project conducted by McAfee and the Center for Strategic and International Studies looked at the threats to power grids, oil, gas, and water across 14 countries. It concluded that there had been dramatic increases in cyber attacks against critical infrastructure, with as much as 80% of the companies experiencing, quote, large-scale attacks, end quote. According to the project report, nearly 30% of the companies believed they were unprepared for the attack, and then more than 40% expected a major cyber attack within the next 12 months. Also, according to an Office of Management and Budget report, the number of reported cyber incidents affecting U.S. Federal agencies shot up 39% in 2010, 39%. Approximately 41,776 reported attacks, up from roughly 30,000 the year before. I am positive the witnesses will elaborate on the threat, and I look forward to hearing from the panel. We will now recognize the distinguished ranking member, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Tierney, for his opening statement.
Well, thank you. Director of the Control Systems Security Program at the Department of Homeland Security's National Cybersecurity Division. Short title. Mr. McGurk has agreed to testify before the subcommittee. It was pretty much a short notice for him, and during a week which the Department of Homeland Security, as I understand, is going to be testifying in 5 different cybersecurity hearings, including a similar hearing that was held this morning. And I know next week the full committee is going to hold yet another hearing on cybersecurity featuring 4 different senior-level administration witnesses to discuss the administration's comprehensive legislative proposal to improve cybersecurity with a focus on our nation's critical infrastructure and the Federal Government's own networks and computers. The proposal was drafted in response to the numerous legislative proposals introduced in the last Congress and specific requests from Congressional leadership. That White House legislation won't be the focus of today's hearing, but is still a much-needed starting point for a very important conversation. And as somebody who doesn't purport to be a techie at all, I can tell you that I had a great deal of concern about the exposure that we have in this area, particularly after having served a number of years on the Intelligence Committee, and where that conversation goes should cause some sleepless nights for a lot of people. As the computer technology has advanced, Federal agencies and our nation's critical infrastructure, whether it's power distribution or water supply, telecommunications, or emergency services, have all become increasingly dependent on computerized information systems to carry out their operations, to process and maintain and report. All of that has been the service where public and private organizations increasingly rely on computer systems to transfer money and sensitive and proprietary information, conduct operations, and deliver services. The interconnected nature of these systems creates risk for our national security, our economic security, and our public safety. Now, just last month in Massachusetts, a virus called W32.Quackbot, Q-A-K-B-O-T, of all things, was discovered on computers at the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development As a result, the Labor Department said as many as 210,000 unemployed workers may have had data compromised, including their names, Social Security numbers, employer identification numbers, addresses, and email addresses. Although the virus was originally discovered back in April, it wasn't until last week that the Labor Department realized the virus had survived its early eradication efforts and resulted in a data breach. That specific example happened at a state government agency, but it highlights the potential threat to Americans all across the country if our Federal computer networks are not adequately protected. As many commentators have documented, cyber attacks on our Federal IT systems are on the rise. The Chairman just went through the numbers on that. And it's becoming increasingly clear that current efforts to counteract the attacks are woefully insufficient. The connectivity between information systems, the Internet, and other infrastructures also creates opportunities for attackers to disrupt telecommunications, electrical power, and other critical services. Some industry sectors are so vital to the nation that their incapacity or destruction would have a debilitating impact on national security, the national economic security, or public health and safety. Federal law enforcement and intelligence agencies have identified multiple sources of threats to our information systems and our critical infrastructure. These threats include foreign nations engaged in espionage and information warfare, criminals, hackers, disgruntled employees, and contractors. In one recent example, it has been alleged that the Chinese government spread a virus that attacked Google and at least 80 other United States companies. Not all threats to Federal cybersecurity are external. In June 2010, WikiLeaks released thousands of classified Department of State and Department of Defense documents. Immediately following the release of those documents, the Secretary of Defense commissioned 2 internal Department of Defense studies to evaluate any weaknesses in their system. The studies found that the Department's policies for dealing with an internal security threat were inadequate and that the Department had limited capability to detect and monitor anomalous behavior on its classified computer networks. So these examples simply underline the need for a comprehensive legislative approach that will protect our national security, health, safety, and all of the American people. We have an obligation to ensure that the government's IT systems are secure and that any critical infrastructure is protected from the threat of cyber attack. The failure to properly secure these networks could have dire consequences. So I look forward to this hearing and to learning more about the threat landscape and the challenges we face in addressing this growing problem. And again, I thank our witnesses and Mr. Chairman for bringing this hearing.
Thank you. Members will have 7 days to submit opening statements for the record. We will now recognize the panel. Mr. Sean McGurk is Director of National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center at the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Philip Bond is the President of Tech America. Mr. James A. Lewis is Director of the Technology and Public Policy Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And Mr. Dean Turner is the Director of Global Intelligence Network Security Response at Symantec. Again, gentlemen, we appreciate you all being here. I would like to recognize each of you for 5 minutes for an opening statement. If you could try to keep it to 5 minutes, and any additional information that you want to provide, please, we'll be able to submit it to the record. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. If you would please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. We will now recognize Mr. McGurk for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Tierney, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Sean McGurk. I am the Director for the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, henceforth known as NCIC. Thank you for inviting me today to discuss this important issue along with this distinguished panel of experts on cyber threats and the impact on critical infrastructure. As both the Chairman and the Ranking Member have already identified, sensitive information is routinely stolen from both government and private sector networks. Last year, we saw an increase in the threat as a result of not what was being taken from networks, but what was being left behind in the result of what was known as Stuxnet. Successful cyber attacks could potentially result in physical damage and loss of life. There are many challenges in the current landscape: strong and rapidly expanding capabilities, lack of comprehensive threat and vulnerability awareness, and our information infrastructure is dependent upon its continual availability for our way of life. The cyber environment is not homogeneous under a single department or agency or the private sector. We recognize that cybersecurity is a team sport. Government does not have all the answers, so we must work closely with the private sector to provide solutions. There is no one-size-fits-all, and there is no Maginot Line to protect the cyber domain. It is about information sharing, and it is about sharing knowledge collectively. Knowledge is only power when it is shared. We must leverage our expertise and our access to information, along with industry-specific needs, capabilities, and timelines. Each partner has a significant role to play and a unique capability in this diversity in this environment. In my 34 years of experience with over 28 years serving in the United States Navy, you learn that everyone has an ability to contribute. The mission in cyber is manyfold, and our goals are clear. In the law enforcement environment, they work closely with the other agencies to identify and prosecute cyber intrusions. The intelligence and military community works to attribute, to defend, and then to pursue those individuals. DHS, along with the private sector, including the financial services sector, energy sector, communications, and others, work to prepare, prevent, respond, recover, and restore. Coordinating the national response to domestic emergencies is more of a matter of what and how, and not necessarily who and why until much later. To that end, I would like to emphasize that my responsibilities from an operational standpoint are focused on preventing and resolving attacks, not attributing the source of those threats. I would be willing to take any questions in the future regarding the cyber threats and the cyber capabilities of other countries with the committee under an appropriate classified setting with the available interagency representatives. The NCIC, or the National Cybersecurity Communications Integration Center, works closely with government and all levels of the private sector to coordinate the integrated and unified response to cyber communications incidents. Sponsoring security clearances for the private sector enables us to have our industry partners on the watch floor in a classified environment, looking at actionable intelligence and providing information to asset owners and operators in near real time. The DHS components have all been integrated into the NCIC, along with representatives from other agencies such as the National Security Agency, U.S. Cyber Command, FBI, and the U.S. Secret Service, and representatives from the intelligence community at large. In addition, we have private sector representatives sitting on the watch floor from the communications sector, the IT sector, the financial services sector, and the energy sector. Additionally, we have representatives from State, local, tribal, and territorial governments represented by the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. In conclusion, within our current legal authorities, we continue to engage, collaborate, and provide analysis, vulnerability, and mitigation assistance to the private sector. We have experience and expertise in dealing with the private sector in planning, steady state, and crisis scenarios. We have deployed numerous incident response teams and assessment teams that enable us to prevent, respond, recover, and restore from cyber incidents. Finally, we work closely with the private sector and our interagency partners in law enforcement and in the intelligence community to provide the full complement and capabilities of the Federal Government for the private sector in response to a cyber incident. Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Tierney, and distinguished members of the panel, let me conclude by reiterating that I look forward to exploring opportunities to advance this mission in collaboration with the subcommittee and my colleagues in the public and private sector. Also, if the committee has any questions regarding the Administration's legislative proposal, I will be happy to defer those issues to the policy representatives testifying before the full committee next week. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify, and would be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Bond, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Tierney, members of the committee. Honored to be here on behalf of Tech America, the largest industry trade association in the space in the U.S. with some 1,000 member companies. Offer just a few thoughts on the challenge in cyber and the policy response we need. First, I would observe that cyber criminals respond rapidly. They are creative. In 2010, McAfee Labs identified more than 20 million new pieces of malware globally. 2011 online fraud report from RSA, the security division of EMC, found that the U.S. has consistently hosted and been the target of a majority of the worldwide cyber attacks. Economic impact is serious. It's about $6 million a day when a corporation's site is down on average, and worldwide economy loses some $86 billion a year due to cyber attacks. Protecting our networks is, as the Chair has observed, a public-private shared responsibility. Neither one of us can do it alone. The private sector responsibility to innovate and operate its own infrastructure in a safe way. The government, an obligation to share timely and accurate information so that the private sector can secure itself and turn around and help to secure the government. I'll defer to our witness from Symantec on a little bit more technical descriptions of some of the threats. I would just underscore this. A range of threat actors, especially right now, including advanced persistent threats, APTs, you'll hear more about that, are going directly after the end user. They attempt to trick them into downloading malware or divulging sensitive information. Again, it's the actual user being targeted, not the mechanical system, the software, or whatever. So it is going after human error. As criminals probe for a soft spot in a system, they are also probing now the individuals who connect to that network. Now, with the increased reliance on all kinds of IT devices, now we see the great shift to mobile devices, and that too will be an opportunity for cyber criminals. Applications many times are downloaded by users and not always being properly vetted. So we would submit that the policymakers in the space and the industry as well, and the government, need to view security as an absolute basic, a basic, not to be added on after, but to be built in from the ground up. And now I would observe many companies are doing exactly that. We need everybody to do that. I want to spend a couple of minutes here remaining on some thoughts for you to consider as you craft legislation, but let me break here to underscore something that needs to be said. Technology and innovation are a huge net positive for the U.S. economy and for government service as well. They are key to national security. The warfighter has an advantage. The key to homeland security, the key to economic security, high-paying jobs, where we need to be as an economy. But with those advantages, there also have been some downsides. That's what we're attempting to talk about today. So please consider, first, in policy, Congress should do no harm. Do not undermine innovation. It's our advantage. One size fits all will not work. Second, government should promote an outcome-based, layered security approach. Government should develop processes to manage and measure performance associated with real security. Third, government should adopt a risk-based approach to our nation's infrastructure. That means critical infrastructure should be defined to include only that which is of the utmost importance to national security, and then truly work to secure it. Fourth, we believe government can provide incentives to encourage industry to invest and do the right and best practices in security. For example, safe harbor from data breach notification when an organization does what it should in advance of a breach incident. Fifth, Congress should update our government's federal information security practices and laws to perform in a more nimble environment. So we strongly support updating FISMA, and I know the committee knows about that. Finally, if industry is to act at the behest of government, it is necessary that there be clear liability protections. So if you do what you should do or at the government's behest, you should also be protected from unintended consequences or liabilities. Again, on behalf of the industry, thank you for holding the hearing. We look forward to doing all that we can to be a part of the public-private partnership to find a solution and maintain our national advantage in innovation.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the committee for the opportunity to testify. I'm really impressed with the energy that the committee is bringing to this issue. It's something we need. We depend as a nation on the Internet, but it is not secure, and this gives criminals and foreign opponents a real opportunity to damage the United States. Cyber threats fall into two categories: high-end attacks that cause damage, destruction, or casualties, and threats from cybercrime and cyber espionage. 5 countries, including Russia and China, can launch high-end cyber attacks. Another 30 countries are developing these capabilities. States use skilled proxies, cybercriminals, and hackers to help them. Cyber attacks could destroy critical infrastructure or disrupt essential networks and services. At the moment, however, no nation is likely to attack the United States because they fear retaliation. Terrorists do not yet have cyber attack capabilities, nor do dangerous nations like Iran and North Korea. However, they are eagerly pursuing these cyber capabilities. We do not know how close they are to acquiring them, but the moment they acquire them, we can expect to see a damaging cyber attack. The immediate threat to the national interest comes from crime and espionage. The Internet, with all its weaknesses, has created a golden age for espionage, and the U.S. has been the chief victim. We have lost military technology, intellectual property from high-tech companies, oil exploration data, and confidential business information. Banks suffer million-dollar losses almost every month. None of this attracts much attention. Some companies prefer to conceal their losses, and in some cases, companies may not even know they've been hit. Estimates of the damages, as you heard, are in the billions of dollars. Weak cybersecurity damages our economic competitiveness and technological leadership. What can we do about this? And there's certainly a new energy in Washington about approaching this problem, which is great. First, we need to accept that we need a new approach that puts cybersecurity as a major national security problem. The most dangerous threats in cyberspace come from foreign militaries and foreign intelligence agencies. Second, this new approach needs to combine trade policy, law enforcement, military strategy, and critical infrastructure protection. For critical infrastructure, this means that DHS must be able to mandate risk-based performance standards. Public-private partnerships are an important part of this. It would help, however, to differentiate where the private sector is strongest in things like information sharing or innovation, and where government action is needed. The immediate question is whether we can improve our defenses before there is a damaging attack. Most of the experts I know believe this is not possible, that America will only act after a crisis. I believe that the work of this committee and others can help us avoid that fate and let us do what is necessary to improve public safety and national security in cyberspace. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Turner, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chaffetz and Ranking Member Tierney and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today as the committee considers cybersecurity and the current threat level to the United States. And Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the nearly 500 Symantec employees based in your district in Linden, we certainly appreciate your focus on cybersecurity issues. My name is Dean Turner, and I am the Director of Symantec's Global Intelligence Network. Symantec is the world's information security leader. With over 25 years' experience in developing Internet security technology, our best-in-class global intelligence network allows us to capture worldwide security intelligence data. We maintain 11 security response centers globally and utilize over 240,000 attack sensors in more than 200 countries to track malicious activity 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. In short, if there's a class of threat on the Internet, Symantec knows about it. In my written testimony, I have provided the committee with greater detail on the evolving threat landscape, as well as an assessment of some of the real-world impacts of cyber attacks on businesses and individuals. I also touch on major challenges and vulnerabilities associated with securing new technologies and how organizations can better secure their important and critical systems. In our April 2011 Symantec Internet Security Threat Report, we observed several key threat landscape trends for the calendar year of 2010. The year was bookended by two significant targeted attacks, including Hydrack, otherwise known as Aurora, and Stuxnet. Stuxnet was a game changer, exemplifying just how sophisticated and targeted threats are becoming. It demonstrated the vulnerability of critical national infrastructure to attack, and Stuxnet was the first publicly known threat to target industrial control systems. Social networks. Social networks continue to be a security concern for organizations as government agencies and companies struggle to find a satisfactory compromise between leveraging the advantages of social networking and limiting the dangers posed by the increased exposure of potentially sensitive and exploitable information. Leveraging information from social networking sites as part of a social engineering campaign is one of the simplest and most effective ways an attacker can lure their target to a malicious website. For example, an attacker can use information gathered from a social networking site to create a targeted email that then lures a victim to a website that hosts malicious code. If the victim visits the website, a Trojan, for example, a keystroke logger or backdoor, can be installed, and that begins exfiltrating sensitive information back to the attacker. In 2010, attack toolkits continued to see widespread use. A typical toolkit today is built to allow the cybercriminal to monetize infected machines in every way possible. For example, keystroke loggers are a simple way to capture any password a user typed in. Other Trojans can also steal email addresses found on the machine, as well as add additional malware. Attack toolkits and their ability to update over the web greatly increase the speed with which new vulnerabilities are packaged, exploited, and spread. One of the most significant attack kits known at the moment is the Zeus Trojan, and is a favorite of cybercriminals due to its ease of use and low cost, about $400 in the underground economy. It takes little to no technical knowledge to launch this type of attack, and of course it can be extremely profitable for cybercriminals. With the proliferation of smartphones and mobile devices, users are increasingly downloading third-party applications, which has created an opportunity for the installation of malicious applications. In 2010, there was a 42% increase in the number of reported new mobile operating system vulnerabilities, and most mobile malicious code is now designed to generate revenue. Therefore, there's likely going to be more threats created for these devices as people increasingly use them for sensitive transactions, such as online shopping and banking. We've learned many lessons from today's threat landscape, and while the sophistication level of attacks is increasing, as is the potential and real damage caused by such attacks, we need to turn these lessons into action. In addition to the recommendations contained in my written testimony, the following steps must be taken in order to better protect critical systems from cyber attack. First, develop and enforce IT policies and automate compliance processes. Second, authenticate identities by leveraging solutions that allow businesses to ensure only authorized personnel have access to those systems. And third, secure endpoints, messaging, and web environments. In addition, defending critical internal servers and implementing the ability to back up and recover data need to be top priorities. Members of the committee, cybersecurity faces a constantly evolving threat, and there is no single solution to prevent attacks. Attackers are getting smarter and more resourceful every day. Because of that, any solution must include the private sector's expertise and innovation. We must continue to be vigilant in protecting our economy, our national security, and our way of life. Symantec applauds Congress for focusing much-needed attention on cybersecurity, and we look forward to continuing this important dialogue. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. We'll now start the questioning, and I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes, and maybe even a little bit longer than that. I appreciate all the expertise. I mean, continually, routinely, what we hear is the threat, the threat, the threat. It's happening. We're quantifying something at $86 billion and perhaps beyond. I do think there are probably a number of companies that would be embarrassed to even allow it out there that there was some sort of security breach. We're constantly told as consumers and shoppers that it's safe and secure to type in our critical information, our personal information, just because it has that little lock on there. What should consumers, what should the average person in Topeka, Kansas, what should they be thinking about when they go to type in? How do you really tell if it's secure or not? And can you ever? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Mr. Bond?
Sure. I'll take a first stab at it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I think that I would urge consumers to do what a national education campaign has urged, which is stop, think, and connect. So many of these newly designed threats that come in and pose as something they're not, trying to get you to either give information or simply click on a bogus connection, very often can be understood or gleaned or perceived as a threat by simply stopping and thinking through, wait a minute, is this really coming from the company or entity that it purports to? This links to issues about short address names and other things that are part of the challenge right now. But I do think that a public education campaign that tells people to stop and think before they connect can have measurable impacts, and so that's a beginning point.
Certainly the success of Twitter and Facebook in particular, social networks have become just immense globally. Mr. Lewis, what sort of threat or danger to young people, old people, people to participate on those types of social networks, how secure, if at all, is the information that's provided on those?
Well, the intent, Mr. Chairman, of course, for the information is to be public. so it's easily collected. And we know there's been many problems in the past. One of them, my favorite in some ways, is the fact that people will often use, their pet's name or, their birthplace as their password. Then they'll list it on the website. And so we've seen many, many incidences where guessing the password on these sites isn't that difficult. They're a treasure trove for cyber criminals because you can harvest all kinds of data that will give you hints on passwords, employment, where your bank is. So they've become a kind of unmanageable problem. Now, there's little that the companies can do about that. I don't want to blame Twitter or Facebook or any of them. People choose to put their information up there, and they haven't thought enough, as you heard from Phil, they haven't thought enough about what the implications are. If you're going to have a Facebook account, don't use your dog's name as the password.
Mr. McGurk, I'd like to learn a little bit more about the differences or perhaps the similarities between cyber attacks from domestic and international sources. Are there distinguishable differences or motives between the domestic and the international actors as Homeland Security has seen it?
Yes, sir. In the Department, as I had mentioned earlier during the testimony, is that we're focusing more on the risk mitigation strategy. So when we look in the National Infrastructure Protection Plan at the definition of risk, we identify it as threat, vulnerability, and consequence. And the Department takes an all-hazards approach. The challenge there is identifying where the threat actors are originating. That is a part of it, but from our standpoint, from the mitigation standpoint, in protecting the networks, restoring services, and recovering, the actual source is not as important as the vulnerability and the consequence of those vulnerabilities. So that's really where the Department focuses most of its attention, and how to provide actionable intelligence to the asset owners and operators to prevent further escalation of the consequences of the data breach.
So how far and wide are you doing that? You're doing that, I would assume, with the national interest, the Federal assets that we have. What about the private sector? How involved do you get with them? I mean, there's obviously the Microsofts and Googles and Yahoos of the world, but then there's also, your more medium level size. How interactive are you? Can you possibly be with what will be literally virtually every single entity you could possibly think of?
So one of the areas that we focus on in the NCIC is our assist and assess mission, where we actually send incident response teams and assessment teams out into the field. We've gone from companies of only 7 employees that were experiencing cyber intrusion to Fortune 10 companies, working with them to not only identify what the risk is, but to mitigate that risk in their cyber environments. On average, a week does not go by where I do not have a team in the field working with the private sector to address those cyber vulnerabilities and then to mitigate those risks.
But what percentage of the companies can you possibly get to?
Again, sir, we focus on, to date, we've been able to conduct 75 risk assessments over this past year. We have not had the opportunity or the requirement to turn anyone away. It's completely voluntary. So part of the challenge is when a risk or a threat or intrusion is identified to the Department, we will respond in kind with a team of cybersecurity experts to assist in restoring services. But again, that's a matter of the request coming from industry.
Yes, Mr. Bond.
Yes, thank you. I want to observe here that this is where the power of the network can be tremendously valuable. DHS does not have to go out physically and talk to every company. We do need timely, actionable sharing of information so that the network, led by great vendors like Symantec and others, can then proliferate and spread that word to address whatever the vulnerability is at the earliest possible stage as soon as we know about the threat. You will uncover through the committee's efforts and hearings that there are information sharing challenges between the government and the private sector, between the private sector and the private sector.
Okay. Thank you. My time's expired. And now recognize Mr. Tierney for 5 minutes, or whatever he'd like.
Thank you. So I'm trying to work out something in my mind here that Mr. Bond got me thinking about as he was talking about who's responsible for what and liability protections and incentives and all of that. Now, I understand with respect to our national security concerns and our homeland protection being a part of that, that for government systems, it's on our court. We have the responsibility. We've got to take care of it and move on from that. But in terms of the private sector, when you're not doing business with the government, why isn't that on you? Why is it on you to make sure that your systems are protected? I see that Mr. McGurk has got teams running all over the place doing what I would have thought was your job. You're making sure that you're safe, making sure that nobody can get into your system, making sure that consumer information is protected. And if you don't do a good job of that, I suspect people aren't going to buy your product and aren't going to utilize your services. So I don't know why we have to give you incentives, and I don't know why you wouldn't be held liable if you make a mess of it.
Certainly, and it's
We probably need that technology called the microphone.
Thank you. It's an important observation because we believe market forces are primary to shaping good behavior, and we see that time and again. However, let me try to give you an example. If a small community is targeted, and say the bank in that community is targeted because they want to get personal information or financial information because there may be a lot of DOD workers in that community. And the Federal Government says, gee, that small community bank has somehow been breached and we need you to go offline for a minute to help figure this out because it's a serious threat.
Farmer? Let me back up.
Yes.
But the government didn't supply that system to that bank.
No, right.
Somebody in the technology field did on that. So if it's breached, it's nice that you use the example, a lot of government workers are in there. Let's back up a second. Assume there aren't any government workers in that area.
That's not the point of liability.
Okay.
Okay. So for their inability to provide a secure system, there are going to be questions about the community bank in the future. But while they're down because of a government request or demand, and Farmer McDonald doesn't get his loan and loses the farm, is the bank liable because they went down at government request?
Forget the bank. The bank didn't put the system in, all right? They bought it from somebody, and they paid for their service of installing it or whatever. And if it goes down, whether it goes down because somebody breached it and the government suggests they go down or whatever, it's still their fault and their problem. And why wouldn't all of the responsibility and obligation lie with them? Not lying with the government to protect their national security. We don't assess the government every time they come in and protect us. But the people that go out and sell to a bank in a community that they're going to give them a system that's safe and secure, why doesn't the buck stop there?
I'm trying to make a distinction that I think is legitimate. When then the government says, based on what we know, you should do this or we require you to do this, and you do that, any liability that stems from that step should be protected because you're doing something in accord with policy or a government request.
Okay, and you wouldn't do it on your own is what you're saying. You wouldn't look in and see what happened and figure that you're going to put those safeguards in of your own volition?
No, you would, and I'm failing to communicate because I'm trying to.
No, you're not. I just don't accept your premise. It's not that you're failing to communicate. It's just for whatever reason that you have to do something or whatever like that it seems like your customer would want you to do and expect you to do. I don't understand the shifting of responsibility and obligation.
If it is an action taken at government requirement or policy, I don't think then it's the government's intent to make a company liable for obeying the law.
So let's take your example, which I thought was on the, the most favorable position you could think for yourself. Let's take there's a lot of people who work in the government, the Department of Defense, something living in a particular neighborhood doing business with a credit union or a bank, and the system that somebody in the private industry put in on the premise that it was secure and operative and all of that goes down and there's a breach. You're telling me that you take the government to tell you to shut it down or the government to tell you how to put it up safely, you wouldn't come across that on your own, and that if you didn't come across that on your own, the government had to go in and take action, and therefore you should be responsible for anything that results from you taking those steps. So one of two things to happen. You're going to go in and try to resolve it yourself, or somebody's going to have to suggest to protect the consumers in the community that it's going to be done, and then you say, well, if I do it the way they say to do it, because I wouldn't do it on my own, then I'm going to be shielded from any responsibility or liability. Is that your position?
No, but I appreciate your framing it for me. No, what I'm trying to underscore is that when there is a policy or something in place that has a requirement to it, that there not be liability attached to obeying the requirement. We could think of a lot of different examples, but if you are adhering to the rules and best practices, and then something about that policy causes harm as a response, that's something that you're obeying policy on and you should not be liable when you're obeying.
How do we ever get best policies to keep on getting better if you never have any incentive to do it because you're covered once you do the threshold thing that's in place at a given time?
Well, I could reverse it and say, then why would you ever obey the government rule if you're also not protected in obeying that rule?
Maybe we don't have a government rule. Maybe we just leave you out there to the market. So when you go down and that community goes down or whatever, then you're on your own. Would that be something you want? There's no consumer protections, no government regulations, and would that make you more happy?
No, I'm taking your earlier point that market forces really do matter, but I'm trying to make the point that if we pass rules and companies obey those rules, that should not usher in some liability because you obeyed the rule.
And I guess I'm not trying to be contentious with you. I'm trying to get to the bottom of something I think is an interesting question to ask here. Ought there be no government regulations in this area?
Well, Mr. Tierney, if I may
If after he answers it, I want to give an opportunity to answer it, then I'm happy if
Sure.
the Chairman goes along with it. Since it's the two of us, I suppose we go back and forth all day. Mr. Bond, go ahead.
No, I'm not advocating that. I think there are already some regulations in place, certainly around the government systems and then how they interact with private sector systems through contractors and others. So I'm not
Okay, but
here
other
to
than
advocate.
that, should there be any government regulations on your provision of systems to private entities at all, or should it just be totally unregulated?
I think that is exactly the, I think it is a good question that we should look at. What are the use of standards? What are the use of industry best practice and other things that government and the private sector are coming up with together, and that any regulatory steps should be taken very carefully with all the expertise of the different players in the room. But I'm not here to draw any kind of line in the sand. I'm here to say that you need technical experts like Mr. Turner and others in the room to understand what the implications are in an interconnected world.
And just to add to that, sir, I think it's important that when we're discussing liability, that we acknowledge the fact that it's incredibly difficult to pin where that liability sits. There's no such thing as a 100% secure, foolproof piece of software. It doesn't exist out there, I'm sorry to say.
Well,
Vulnerabilities, sir, are a fact of life.
But there was never a 100% secure train either, but at some point liability went to the locomotive company because technology had advanced to the point where they were the ones that should be held responsible for anything that came from that.
I understand, sir, but when you're asking to assess liability on a particular focal point, whether that be the Federal Government, the private sector, or the vendor or whatever, we have to deal with something called the law of unintended consequences. It is virtually impossible for us as an industry or anybody to be able to test with 100% certainty how that particular product, software, service is going to be used in that situation.
But our liability system has never gone on 100% certain, and that it's been who's responsible, and then people make a decision about what's reasonable. I think what I'm just trying to figure out here is whether it's reasonable to leave it all to the industry to set the standards and do it out and then to suffer whatever consequences or obligation there might be, or is there some advocacy here that the government should, on behalf of the consumer, whoever that might be, a business or an individual, set some standards and for compliance on that?
And I suspect,
haven't figured out whether people are for or against one way or the other yet.
And I suspect, sir, you'll find that the answer lies somewhere in the middle, that it is, again, that public-private partnership.
Can I add something, Mr. Chairman, on this? Because it's an interesting line of questioning, and there's a point that we might want to put out right in the open. And I think if you would use your experience and the experience of other committee members with the intelligence community, you would be able to confirm this. But there is no such thing as a secure, unclassified system. I've been told by senior intelligence officials that they have never seen an unclassified system that has not been penetrated. So we're dealing with a problem where anyone can get in, right? And the solution to that is not a technological solution. Yes, over time, our technologies will get better, and that will squeeze out the low-end threat. So the high school kid who used to be able to break in a couple hours, now he might have to spend a little more time. But I think that's why a lot of us are in favor of a comprehensive approach. You need to have law enforcement cooperation with other countries. You need to have strong military forces to deter potential opponents. You need to work with the service providers to get them to help consumers. And you do need some kind of what we're calling now risk-based standards run through the government that would impose some requirements on at least critical infrastructure companies. If we can get a package together, we can deal with the problem, but no single part will solve this very damaging situation.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm taking from that is you don't feel that you can do your optimum job without the assistance of the government in some respect. Is that fair to say? Oh, I mean, I guess you're all talking about partnerships and synergy. So I'm guessing that what the industry is saying is we can't do this right without government assistance to some level here or something.
I think I would say that we absolutely need and welcome government involvement around the critical infrastructure, and as they do that, that we want to make sure experts are in the room because these are very complicated, interconnected issues. That's simply it.
Mr. McGurk, let's talk about as we talk about the threat, where do you see the biggest threats outside of the domestic United States, outside the United States? What are the biggest threats? Where do you see them coming from?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, focusing on the total consequence and vulnerability aspect, the threat actors range in sophistication and capability from nation-state sponsored through criminal activity down to a hacktivist and entirely into what we call the script kiddie environment.
How many nations do we how many nations are attacking this country on the cybersecurity front? I mean, nation actors.
The challenge with that, Mr. Chairman, is a point that was made earlier by some of the members of attribution. It's very difficult to positively attribute known activity. Even if I were to say an IP address or the source address originated in a particular country or a particular area, that may not be the actual actor. So the attribution piece is very difficult.
I recognize it's difficult, but you got some number that you've assessed. At least I hope you do. What is that number? How many countries?
Sir, I would actually defer that to the intelligence community representatives in another forum, and I wouldn't be able to comment on that here today.
What is the consequence for somebody who's attacking us on a cybersecurity front? Is there anything we can do or have done? Is there any instance where we've actually said, okay, country X, you've been doing this, this is the consequence? Is there any instance of us, any consequence of that?
To my knowledge, sir, I'm not familiar with any official démarche that has ever been issued or ever been delivered to a particular nation state associated with malicious cyber activity.
How often are we getting attacked from nation states? Daily? Hourly?
There are hourly cyber attacks, whether they originate and are state-sponsored or if they just originate from IP addresses that are being spoofed as far as the location, if they're criminal activity, or if they're independent activists that are operating under the protection of a nation-state.
Let's pretend we have a nation-state that says, yes. What is the consequence? What do we do?
So, not necessarily dealing in hypothetical, sir, but looking at the consequence analysis that the Department conducts associated with cyber-physical systems. One of the demonstrations that we conducted in 2007 was known as the Aurora experiment, where we demonstrated the capability of taking digital protective circuits and physically destroying large pieces of rotating equipment. This type of equipment has years to repair or replace.
All right, now that's cool.
Yes.
I like hearing that. All right, what else can we do?
So subsequently, what we recognize is that we have to apply a defense-in-depth strategy.
I hope we're doing that, by the way.
Yes, sir. In many of these cases, these legacy-based systems are 10, 20, or 30 years old. So subsequently, we can't bolt on a new application. So we either need to enclave these pieces of equipment in a secure environment or mitigate the risk associated with operating those systems in a connected world. The comment was made earlier about separating networks and never finding a clear or a secure network. In our experience conducting hundreds of vulnerability assessments in the private sector, in no case have we ever found the operations network, the SCADA system or energy management system, separated from the enterprise network. On average, we see 11 direct connections between those networks. And in some extreme cases, we've identified up to 250 connections between the actual producing network and the enterprise environment. So that's one of the challenges that we have, as I mentioned earlier, in actually securing these networks and understanding the consequences associated with the vulnerabilities and not just the threat actors.
All right, that doesn't give us much confidence, but it's reality. That's what we're after here. If I went down the row here, what do you all see as the single most significant weakness in the system right now? Maybe we'll start with you, Mr. Bond, and we'll kind of loop around and end with you, Mr. McGurk.
I would probably identify better information sharing coming between the government and the private sector. I don't think we are sometimes free to discuss the threats we see so we can respond quickly.
Mr. Lewis?
I would go back to your point about consequences. If nobody's ever punished for doing something bad or even chastised, they're just going to do more of it. So I think our failure to have any consequence for any sort of cyber action is really damaging.
Mr. Chair?
I would have a tendency to agree with Mr. Bond that information sharing is a key component, but I'd also add, and I'd rank just as highly, is that we need to start moving away from the mindset that we currently find ourselves in, which is detection and remediation. This is the cycle we're in. We detect and we remediate, detect and remediate. We're always behind the curve. We need to get a little more predictive and a little more proactive in terms of reaching out, which sort of dovetails into Mr. Lewis's comment about consequences for action, sir.
Okay. Mr. McGurk?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to go last, because I would say all of the above, and that was
I agree with you.
to do so.
I agree.
But in addition, if I may add on the information sharing piece, arguably we've been sharing information for years now between the government and the private sector. What we need to focus is collaboratively developing knowledge so that we can provide actionable intelligence to mitigate the risk. A great example of that was in November of last year. There was a particularly malicious piece of code that was known as the Here You Have virus. That was actually identified through the intelligence community as being a known malicious piece of software. And within hours, the Department was able to identify that particular piece of code and provide actionable intelligence to the community through a series of declassification measures using the private sector's expertise to provide information to the private sector so they could take the necessary steps to mitigate the risk. That's the step that we need to do to actually have an effect on cyber risk at net speed, and not just simply put together another information sharing body.
I want to go quickly here about the cloud. There's a lot of movement within the industry for people to encourage to store their information on the cloud, which creates questions about security and, do I trust some major provider more than I trust my own local server, or do I question it more than, or do I think it's more safe than my local, my individual computer or whatnot? What are the vulnerabilities there? Should we feel more secure, more safe with cloud computing and movement to the cloud, or less? Let's start with Mr. Lewis this time.
You caught me off guard, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Right now, I'd say there's probably a slight advantage to having your stuff in the cloud, because some of the companies, some of the service providers can devote more attention, and particularly for small and medium enterprises, they may actually benefit from having a big company, a Google or a Microsoft or whoever, an IBM, manage their data. There's other drawbacks to it. For large enterprises, I'm not sure that they benefit, and a lot depends on how well the cloud service providers actually do. So on the whole, small companies better off, big companies maybe a wash.
Mr. Turner?
I think I agree with Mr. Lewis in a sense. I do think, however, that the enterprises do benefit, because a lot of what we're seeing in the move to the cloud is driven by total cost of ownership and reduction of costs, et cetera, et cetera. From a security perspective, it's going to be contextual, because you're going to have to ask yourself those very important questions about who do I trust my data with. And that's going to come down to reputation. And that's going to come down to past behavior. And it's not meant to be a pitch, sir, but that is certainly the case in the questions that have to be asked, because if they don't, there will be a lot of people as we move to the cloud that will be able to make these services available, whether they be onshore in the United States or offshore and all these other places. And what's the track record going to be? We have to make a very clear and very careful assessment of the information that we're willing to share, because not all information should be protected. It's not all worth protecting.
Very good. Let me shift here a little bit, if I could. And one of the last things I want to bring up, and that is, Mr. McGurk, let's talk about databases. The Federal Government has over 2,000 databases. Now, on one hand, you can say maybe that diversified portfolio provides a degree of safety and security, so the Bureau of Indian Affairs is separate from the Department of Justice, and I can understand the need that the security component of the Department of Justice is probably a little bit higher than the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But what are the weak links that are associated with that? Do we want to consolidate those and have 5 really good data warehouses or databases, or is this diversified portfolio advisable? Because I worry that so many agencies are trying to create so many different things. We're duplicating efforts, and consequently, they're all probably not nearly as secure as we want them to be. But what's your perception of that?
Thank you, sir, for that question. It's actually, I would believe, a capabilities versus requirements discussion. When you talk about the dispersed nature of the databases and the infrastructure, it goes back indeed to the cloud discussion we were just having. One of the benefits of that secure environment is that you can have a disparate approach to data storage, so that not all the keys to the kingdom are in one location. and that provides an obscurity model for data in motion and data at rest. So by being able to do that, we can better allow for a distributed approach for data security. That being said, one of the initiatives that the Department has been executing for quite some time now is the Trusted Internet Connection program, and that was part of the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative, to actually, instead of trying to instrument or monitor each of these separate departments and agencies, but we roll that up to an aggregation point so that we can understand flow and control the information access points at an aggregated standpoint and still allow for the diversity of the independent departments and agencies.
Could I
Yes,
just
sure.
interject real quickly, because I want to make sure to offer to brief the committee and its members. Our Tech America Foundation actually has 73 companies and academics involved in a commission right now to advise the government on the cloud and the leadership opportunity for the U.S. in the cloud. And one of the questions that they are going to be addressing is the security profile of the cloud. Okay. And I think there are leading thinkers who would challenge Jim's assertion and maybe even say the cloud will be more secure for all enterprises.
Thank you. Mr. Tierney.
Thank you. So, Mr. Bond, you in your testimony emphasized the public-private relationship, and particularly with respect to education and information sharing on that. So do you think that education and information sharing are sufficient to protect the critical infrastructure from cyber attacks? Do you think that's where we should leave it?
No, I think we presume that there are going to be special rules, regulations, and requirements around the critical infrastructure. And we think education, jointly identifying where the government should invest R&D dollars in cybersecurity, all will be a part of that ultimate solution. But we certainly advocate for clear distinction of what the critical infrastructure is, a good definition of it, and special requirements for it.
Well, you know, in that vein, and I guess I ask this to all of you, there was the President and CEO of the North American Electrical Reliability Corporation, a fellow named Jerry Cawley that you're probably all familiar with. He testified in front of the Armed Services Committee on this topic, and he said that he didn't think that there was clarity of responsibility on that. He thinks collaboration and consultation has been good, but it's been based on an ad hoc relationship with no clear lines of responsibility and authority. Are you all pretty much in agreement with that, or disagreement?
You know, in some ways, the electrical grid is the most attractive target we have for some of our opponents, and it's not secure. And so if the statement that he made was that we have been relying on an ad hoc process, I think that's right, and there's a lot of room for improvement.
So can you tell me why there isn't a clear line of responsibility? What's the impediment to sort of deciding who's going to be in charge of this overall overriding plan that we have?
I think part of the issue too is the responsibility in sharing the data itself. What data can you share? There are a whole host of impediments and barriers to sharing what is arguably confidential information in some areas. So that's part of the issue that I think sort of gets in the way of trying to formalize relationships and trying to putting them in a hierarchical order and say this is who's doing that and this is who's doing what. I think that that's primarily what's been holding back even the larger information sharing relationship that goes on between the public and private sector, not just limited to that particular sector itself.
And can I assume that some countries share this problem and some countries don't, depending on the nature of the government in a given country?
I'm not so sure it actually comes down to on a country-by-country level, to be perfectly honest with you. I think that it's the nature of the issue itself, that you're talking about the sharing of that information. And often, and this is meant to, this is merely to illustrate a problem within the information sharing network, is that sometimes when information goes from the private sector to the public sector, it's a one-way street. And I think that, as part of the whole education thing is that we have to come to the agreement on how do we share that information and to ensure that what comes, that there's valuable information that can be worked on coming back the other way as well.
Just on that note, I talked with one of the larger European countries. They've set up their own, something like our cyber command. And they were telling me what they'd done with their electrical grid and in requiring their grid operators to be more secure. And I said, wow, that's amazing. How did you guys get away with that? We could never do that. And they said, oh, well, when they privatized, they made sure to keep 2 board seats. So where you're seeing a difference emerge is that in the countries that still have a small number of service providers, where the government has a more directive role, they are pulling ahead a little bit. Right now, I'd say we're all sort of in equally bad shape, and one of the trends to watch is whether that changes in a way that disadvantages us.
So let me just leave this with one last question. I'll ask each of you on that. Is what do each of you as individuals think the government role ought to be in protecting the infrastructure for private companies? Mr. McGurk, can we?
So I believe our current role that we're executing as a coordinator and an integrator to provide understanding and awareness across the 18 critical infrastructures is a key role and a service that we provide. As many of my distinguished panel members have said, information may come from one sector and it may be germane to another sector, but there is no direct connection to share that information. By aggregating that at the Department, we're able to take alerts, warnings, or indications coming from the electric sector, anonymize that information or identify the vulnerability, and then provide that to the water sector or the chemical sector or the petroleum sectors. So that's really a service that we provide, and it's a capability that we provide because we do have broad exposure into each of those 18 critical infrastructures.
Thank you. Mr. Bond.
Certainly would underscore the notion that there needs to be a key role in defining the critical infrastructure and having special requirements for that. The farther out you move on the network and the closer to consumer applications and so forth, then I think we need, again, this roundtable of real experts to understand what it means in a networked world, because they're all connected and difficult to determine regulatory schemes.
Mr. Lewis.
Three things. Some kind of flexible, standard-based approach that I would think DHS and the other regulatory agencies would oversee for critical infrastructure. Better information sharing, as you've heard. And then finally, steps that would make the international environment more secure, steps that would deter criminals and other potential attackers.
Thank you. Mr. Turner.
I would agree with everything that's been said on the panel, and again, the benefit
Nice
of going last is that it's easier to do that. I think I would add, though, just in addition to facilitating information sharing and making it easier, is keeping an eye towards that liability. We have to keep in mind that most of the attacks that we see today, the attacks themselves are international in nature. So we're not just dealing with threat actors or threat intelligence that comes from the Five Eyes or from the United States alone. We're also dealing with issues that come from other jurisdictions, other Western jurisdictions, where the sharing of that information is considered, well, to put it bluntly, is very difficult to do and can put you in a lot of hot water. Those are issues that have to be addressed if we're going to get down to this role where we talk about, well, how do we make it easier for governments to protect the private sector, especially when we're talking about critical infrastructure. Well, those are some of the hurdles that we have to address. We don't address them at the higher level. Sharing the information formally at a lower level is difficult. It happens informally now. I wouldn't want to leave the panel with the impression that we do not share information, because that's certainly not the case. I personally have worked with all levels of the United States government on sharing information about current threats to critical infrastructure, but it's in an unofficial capacity because there doesn't exist an official capacity that we can do that.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I want to thank all the panel members for their participation today, your expertise. If there are additional comments or information you'd like to share with us, I'd appreciate it. Mr. McGurk, if you would commit to this committee to help us conduct that confidential briefing, a classified briefing, I should say, we would certainly appreciate that. Is that something that you could commit to?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. It would be my pleasure to help facilitate that.
That would be great. We thank you again for your expertise. And as a fast-moving industry, it's changing at every moment. We appreciate your participation, and thank you again for your expertise and your comments. The committee now stands adjourned.